This is episode number 51 featuring artist Carl Bretzke. Welcome to the PleinAir Podcast from PleinAir Magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we dive into the world of outdoor painting called plein air painting. For those of you who don't know, plein air is a French term which means open air or outdoors. The French say plein air, others say plein air, but however you say it, it's a huge movement of artists around the world going outdoors to paint. It's a lot of fun, and this show is all about it. The podcast is brought to you by Fall Color Week, which is my painter's retreat at Acadia National Park in Maine during the peak week of fall color this coming October. It's all about painting daily with friends, lots of scenery, not only amazing color, but coastal scenes, rocky cliffs, beautiful harbors, distant mountains, lobster boats, lighthouses, vistas from tops of mountains. It's amazing. You can learn more at fallcolorweek.com. It's my desire to help more people fall in love with plein air painting because they will love it so much. You can help them by sharing the podcast with your friends on social media or email, and we hope you'll subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every single week. And if you have feedback for me, please email eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Today's interview is brought to you also by Fine Art Connoisseur Magazine's Russian Art Tour. We're going to Moscow and St. Petersburg for an art experience which is unparalleled. Probably the last time we're ever going to do this one, and we pulled out all the stops behind the scenes. Private collections, museums, art studios, art schools. It's not a painting trip, it's a touring trip, although you can probably slip in some painting. I always do. There's just 8 seats left at this recording, and it will be the most amazing art tour I think I've done in my lifetime. You can learn more at RussianArtTour.com. Well, let's get right to our interview with the amazing Carl Bretzke. We're on the line with Carl Bretzke in Minneapolis. Carl, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you, Eric.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you today, and I'm very curious about your career because from my perspective, it seems like a lot of things have happened to you very recently, and we're hearing more and more about you than ever before. So what's going on? What's happening? Why is that happening?
Well, I think I'm one of the lucky ones that had a full career before and was able to transition into painting. And for some reason, it's taken off for me. So I was in the medical field for 30 some years. And I always had an interest in art, but not until I started taking classes with Joe Paquette, and that was about 12 years ago, that I really became hooked on it.
So tell me a little bit about the medical career. Give us a little background there.
Well, I was an interventional radiologist.
What's that
and what
mean?
All right. So that is a specialty of medicine, and we do surgical type procedures under X-ray guidance. So people will be familiar with, for instance, dilating and stenting arteries. That was one of the many things that we did. We put tubes in all kinds of body cavities and solid organs and in the bloodstream. And then we can put little devices through these tubes to achieve, for instance, we can stop internal bleeding of arteries. We can open clotted arteries or veins. We can fix aneurysms. So that kind of thing.
Gosh, that sounds like a lot of fun.
It is. It's kind of like going to the workshop. So it's a very hands-on kind of thing, and it's also a very visual thing, which who knows if that ties into my art or if art ties into my career. But
well, you got to have pretty good hand-eye coordination because if it unlike a painting, if you screw up, its consequences are pretty severe.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, no one gets hurt in art, but there's still plenty of stress in art. I'd have to be honest and say that, but it's not the same. The funny thing about my job, I was looking at a 2-dimensional image because we do this under X-ray guidance, so we're looking at a TV screen all day. And I was trying to imagine 3 dimensions from 2 dimensions when I'm working on somebody. And now in art, I'm looking at a three-dimensional thing and I'm trying to make it two-dimensional. So it's kind of exactly the opposite.
So how long ago did you give up the medical career, or are you still doing some of it?
I retired last year, but until that, I kind of felt like I was doing two jobs because I think I started doing the PleinAir events back in 2010, and I've kind of been gradually stepping that up each year until it finally got to the point where I went half-time as a physician about 2 years ago so I could do more of the events. And then finally I said, you know what, I'm thinking about art all the time when I'm at work, and I'm old enough, I think I can safely retire and really do art full-time, which is exactly the way it worked out, and I'm really happy with it.
Well, you're a relatively young guy. You're probably not at retirement age, so to speak. So,
no, not quite, but I don't know. It's you can still make a living in art, which is good to know. If I didn't, I would just learn to adapt to retirement as is. But it's been a really pleasant surprise that you can do art and still maintain an income.
So I'm very curious about this because it's something that I teach 2 years ago at Art Marketing Boot Camp, and you were there, I'm probably sure, is we talked about how to transition out of one job into another job. And for some people, there is the ability to match the income. For people who are in higher salaried areas, it may not be quite as possible, but it kind of depends. So did you actually sit down and develop a transition plan, if you will, or did it just kind of happen?
No, it did just kind of happen. I remember Joe Paquette many years ago telling me, you're going to see some success. Just don't rush into it too fast. So I didn't really go out of my way to overmarket for the level that I was at. And I just spent most of my concentrated effort on just getting better. There was a time when I was working that I think I was taking 7 classes a week between Joe and some other options in Minneapolis, and still maintaining a full-time medical practice. So I think work hard early, and as it starts to, success starts to happen, then I think it's reasonable to, add a little marketing effort to it, but you don't want to overmarket too early.
Well, I think that
I don't know. What do you think?
I think the message that is really critically important in that, because it's a mantra for me, is you absolutely have to conquer your craft. You absolutely have to get good at painting. One of the things that always concerns me is people go out too early. Now, there are people who go out and they're ready, but they don't know they're ready. So there's always that delicate balance. But I teach that anybody can market anything, and quite frankly, somebody who's good at marketing can market bad paintings, but we don't want that to be the case. We don't want people to perceive that plein air paintings are something less, that paintings are something less just because somebody is out there marketing it. So we want to make sure that everybody's working on their quality. So you had probably, if I were going to pick a mentor, and of course everybody's going to be ticked off at me for saying this, but the ability to study under Joe Paquette is you probably couldn't pick a better mentor in the world because of his excellent teaching ability. Some people are excellent painters, but they can't teach, but Joe can teach, and he has a lot of depth to it. I have been struggling to find the time to go to his 3-week summertime course where he just gets into everything. I assume you've been through that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I did 12 years with Joe, and then every now and then I still do a workshop with him, but he, like you said, he's, I'm very lucky to have him nearby, and he kind of does everything I want to do as far as quality of drawing, painting, knowing color and color as value and all that. All those skill sets, he's going to always be way ahead of me. So I will keep listening to him and learning from him. But in the meantime, I will say that, there's a lot of great teachers out there.
Absolutely.
And also over the years, I've done workshops with other painters and become very good friends with many of them. And I get so much from everybody, so that my work, I like to think, is a combination of what I learned from Joe, but also these other things that I pick up. So yes, I'm very lucky that I had Joe, but I'm lucky I've got these other painters in my life, and I've enjoyed learning the new things that I didn't get those 12 years in classes, or at least hearing it a different way.
Well, one of the things that I've picked up over the years from a lot of really very accomplished painters is that they could be at the top of their game. They could be somebody who's selling a lot, somebody who's very well known, somebody who's popular, and yet they're never completely satisfied that they have the whole thing down. And so it's not unusual to see somebody who says, that person there is really, really good at brushwork. I'm going to go study them. Or that person there has something special about edges. I'm going to go study with them. Is that kind of the direction that you went?
Kind of. I guess I'm trying to learn as many tools as I can as far as the skills required to paint, because I can actually imagine a painting I would want to paint, and I just am not equipped to necessarily paint it at a certain point. And so I go out and try to learn what it would take to paint a better sky, or to somehow get more chromatic color in my paintings or whatever. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there's skills you can get from everybody. And again, my motivation is try to learn enough that I can paint what I want to paint.
So I'm kind of curious about perspective, because you've had a successful career, and now you've made the switch to being a full-time professional artist. Is that a little bit frightening? Is it invigorating? What's kind of going on in your head?
Well, I can't remember, it was some Zen saying that the trouble is you just don't have enough time, and time is going really fast. So I always wanted to do this, and I'm not getting younger, so I thought I'm just going to pull the plug and try it, and I've been really pleasantly surprised. I enjoy going to work every day, and it feels like work sometimes when I'm standing at the easel or outside for 3-4 hours. I get tired, but it's such a feeling of accomplishment when you're done that I'm motivated to keep going back out there. And well, I enjoyed my work as a radiologist, and I guess I never felt like I disliked doing that, but I didn't have that same can't wait to get to work feeling that I do when I'm painting.
Well, to your credit, you followed what you love. You followed your passion. I would think that in some ways, giving up what you gave up would be very difficult, especially because financially it probably was very rewarding. And, there's always the question about whether or not you're going to make it as an artist. But I think that's a good instruction, a good lesson for all of us, because, you got to wake up every day and do what you love. And if you can't stop thinking about it, then you probably need to do it.
No, and I think there are a lot of people, including myself 10 years ago, that can still do their regular job and enjoy their passion of painting. It just won't be quite as in-depth as what I'm getting right now, but I was certainly happy doing it at the same time I was doing my other job. And that's a great way to start. If you're going to eventually transition, you certainly need to start earlier than the day that you quit your other job. So it worked out for me. Well,
it was a good way to do it. If you spend, if you look forward to, and be practical about things and look forward 5 or 7 years, it takes some time. Especially if you want to be a pro. If you're looking at it from the standpoint of being just doing it for the enjoyment of getting out, then it's a whole different animal, because you can do that your whole life in conjunction with your career. And we have a lot of people listening to this now who are brand new baby painters, and tens and tens of thousands of people who are coming on board to painting because of the PleinAir Podcast, who are discovering it for the first time. many times there are people who are curious about plein air who are artists who have been working in the studio, but they actually haven't gone outdoors. What what do you think are the essentials, now that you've been through it, the essentials that you would put somebody on a track and say, look, follow this track. If you're just getting started, I learned my lessons the hard way, and there are certain things you can avoid. Here's the track you need to follow. What would that track be?
I would start by just saying that you should be aware that if you want to become reasonably proficient at this, that it will be more than just going out painting. You should really work at it. I think instruction is vital, and it's something that even as I've seen success now, and I assume I will in the future, I'll probably continue to do some kind of instructional time each year, whether I go to some more workshops or continue to read. But I think they're all helpful. I guess if anyone that's in painting hasn't read John Carlson's book on landscape painting, I recommend that. That's kind of got everything in it that I think about when I paint. And then at some point, when you feel as though you're relatively proficient at it and people are saying, hey, that's really good, then I found, I think it was like 2010, Bob Upton and I were taking classes from Joe, and for some reason we decided we'd try to get into a plein air event, and we applied to Carmel, and we both got in, and I think we both won awards that year, and it was the first one that we'd done. And I do recommend that at some point, if you think your work is reasonably acceptable or good, then try to get into some events, because what it did for me is it made me go out and paint a lot. I mean, if I'm at the studio, I don't think I'm going to go out and paint 2 paintings a day for a week, but in a plein air event, you do. And so you do a lot of painting, you see what other painters do, and then the big bonus for me is that you meet a lot of people and make a lot of friends, which is the other part of this whole painting equation that I found really fun.
You also gain a lot of confidence because, you're getting the accolades that, you get that, what I like to call social proof. It's one thing if your wife or your partner or your family member or your mother tells you your paintings are good. It's another thing if you're getting it out there in the market. And of course, the best social proof of all is when somebody buys it. I think actually, from my perspective, the best social proof of all would be winning an award, or especially an Artist Choice Award, because if artists like your work, that's a pretty high accomplishment. Yeah,
that's true. And the other one you just mentioned, I think if a stranger buys your work, you know that it's because they really liked it. So, and that's kind of affirming to an artist. So,
how do you know when you're ready? Because that's always the big challenge is when is my work good enough to put it out into the market?
Yeah, I guess I don't know for sure when you're ready. I would say if you have even a possible thought that you're ready, you apply, and most of these are juried events, so hopefully the juror will decide if you're ready. But it doesn't hurt to apply.
I've noticed, in just looking at my own career as an artist, which of course I'm not a full-time artist and don't do the shows, but I've noticed there were times when I felt like I was ready, but I didn't get any positive response to my work, and from peers. And it's they're always try to say something nice like pretty colors, but what I found is that when things started clicking, I started getting unsolicited comments. And that seems to be that because I like the idea of taking the work out to peers, taking the work out to gallery owners, although they may not have the time, and saying, give me feedback here. Don't tell me the good things. Tell me the bad things. Tell me, is it ready? Because you don't want to set everybody up to tell you nice things. You want to know the truth.
Right. Yeah, and I'll be honest, I think that's part of the reason. That's one of the ways Joe Paquette was a good teacher for me, because he wasn't going to sugarcoat anything. Which I think to really advance, you've got to have someone be really honest with you, and he was.
Yeah. Well, he's good about that.
Yeah.
He's a tremendously honest guy.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we all know also that if you do something well, even though the whole thing may not be good, it might be worth hearing that just to give you some confidence. So I think that's also important, and he does that too.
So when you're first starting painting, what do you think are the essentials that that you need to pay attention to first and foremost? Because you hear, if you go to 6 workshops, you hear 6 different ideas.
Right.
And of course, the early painters tend to get seduced by things like details and colors. Where would you recommend? What would the training track be for somebody in terms of the things that they should try to master first?
Well, I don't want to steal anything that Joe Paquette might have said, but I've heard his talk so many times, and I think this is true, that there's a whole list of skill sets that you need, and you try to bring them all up roughly at the same time. And then when you find one of them is weak, you kind of put a little more emphasis on that. If I'm just starting, I would say number 1 is drawing. And by drawing, it's not just the matter of getting an outside shape of something, but to understand how to draw form, which is a geometric 3-dimensional shape, and how to do that with perspective that's correct, and proportion that's correct. And so even to this day, when I'm doing a painting and I start it, I will do a quick drawing with paint, and I'm really paying attention to perspective and proportion. And I'll do lots of measuring early on. For instance, if I put a car in a scene, if you do a car wrong, everyone knows it. It's kind of like looking at a portrait. I don't know what it is. It usually comes down to the proportions of the block shape of that car. So I will actually measure the height and the width and make sure I get that initial block correct, and then make sure that all my lines follow perspective as far as correct angles. So once you get a good drawing, now the rest becomes much easier, and it'll look good right from the start. But then, of course, there's this myriad of other things to think about, values, color, and so forth. But I think almost every artist that is in this for a while will agree that start with a good drawing, then think about value, and then think about color.
You didn't mention composition at all.
Oh, that's because I forgot. But yeah, no, of course.
Well, I was just curious.
No, really. I mean, that's one of those skill set items that you also have to include. I mean, there's what else is there? There's composition, there's edge work, and so forth. But composition, that would probably be that actually trumps drawing as far as what you do initially. You initially get a design that will work, so that you don't spend all your time drawing and then step back and go, oh, I put that right in the middle of the painting. That looks stupid. So positioning objects into a pleasing composition, that's the first thing I do. And whether you do that on a thumbnail sketch, or if you do a light drawing on your canvas that you can wipe out and do over again if you get it wrong, or use a viewfinder, that would be number 1, and then the drawing. So thanks for reminding me.
And would there be any particular compositional tricks that you think would be helpful for people? Or, some artists don't like compositional tricks, using the golden mean, or, placing things in certain parts of the canvas to make it more interesting. What would your way of approaching it be?
Okay, well, I guess I wouldn't call them tricks so much as tips. And I do think that is a good tip, is to avoid putting something dead smack in the middle, or having one I recently heard that makes sense to me is not to bring a diagonal line all the way out to the one corner of the painting. Another would be if you have a horizontal line going across the entire painting, somehow you should break that up. Otherwise, it's going to look like two paintings. Having an unequal balance of light and dark, so that you're predominantly one or the other on your painting. That's another one. See, now I feel like this is a test, but I'm trying to think of all these.
This is a
tips.
test. Yes.
Okay.
And if you're wrong, you will be shot. So
okay.
No, worse than being shot, you'll have to go back to medicine.
Don't do it.
So one of the things that I think the first time we met is we met at the PleinAir convention, 2 conventions ago, when we announced your name on stage as the winner of the PleinAir Salon competition. So you got the pleasure of having your painting on the cover of PleinAir magazine. You won a $15,000 prize. Tell me what that experience was like.
Well, I think that's the best way to meet, first of all. And it was funny because that happened 2 weeks after I retired. So it's like, oh, things are starting off well. As far as how it's changed things for me, I think the biggest thing that happened because of it is I get invited to more invitational PleinAir events than I used to. I think I had at least 1, possibly 2 more galleries approach me to show my work. And I don't know. I mean, there's definitely name recognition, and who knows how that helps you down the line. I imagine it does to some degree. Yeah. But so, in the end, it's how your paintings look.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of curious because, when you enter something like that, you know that there are other good artists who are entering. Did you have any confidence issues? Were you thinking like, well, this is a complete waste of my time. I shouldn't be doing this because, somebody like Joe Paquette might be entering and he's going to win. What are your thought processes when you go through that?
Well, I remember on stage that day, you asked me, did I think I was going to win? And I thought about it for a second, and I think I finally said no. But honestly, I think anyone who submits something to that thinks there's a chance they will win. I know that the odds in something like that are lower than a lot of events because, just like you said, these are some of the best painters in the world submitting. But I think we all reserve some hope that, maybe I'll stack up somehow and win something. Yeah. Maybe not, So
well,
I was hopeful, but I was not unrealistic.
Well, I think you have to have a certain amount of confidence, but I also think that there's value in putting yourself in the game and putting yourself out there because, you can always be timid. You can always say to yourself, well, I'm not ready. It's not time. And maybe it isn't, but everything changes when you put yourself out there. It's the same as you said when you put yourself out there and started applying for events. You started painting more in preparation. You knew that if you got into that event that you had to get out there and perform. You had to shine. You had to do good work. So there's something about it that stimulated you to maybe work a little harder or work a little differently on things.
Yeah, it reminds me of that movie with Jim Carrey, about Yes Man. Remember that movie?
Yes.
Where someone said, you just have to say yes to everything. And so I kind of took that as my goal. And so I just have been saying yes to everything. I end up kind of overstretching my time a little bit doing that, but it makes me work harder, faster. And in the end, I think it's improving what I'm doing. So, yeah.
So have
you an opportunity, do it.
Have you stopped to think about, is there an end game for you in all of this? Is there an ultimate goal in this new painting career that you would look at and say, wow, I've finally arrived? Or is it more about just living the ultimate lifestyle as a painter?
It was never that I wanted to be well known as a painter. My main goal was, I just remember as a kid going to museums thinking, that's a masterpiece. I would love to paint a masterpiece. And so I keep thinking that someday I'll paint a masterpiece. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but I just want to get better at this to somehow leave a mark in painting.
Well, you certainly have some good places to visit in Minneapolis. My favorite in Minneapolis is the Russian Art Museum there.
Oh, I was hoping that would come up because that's my favorite museum in Minneapolis. And if you ever ask me who are my favorite painters in history, I could name all the usual ones everyone's heard of, but I hardly know any Russian names of these artists, but every painting I love in that Russian museum. So I'd say my favorite artists are all dead Russians.
There's a joke there, but I'll leave it alone.
No, I shouldn't have said it like that. I mean, there are so many Russians in history that I think are so great.
Well, that's one of the jewels of Minneapolis, and one of the things that I realized, it took me a while to realize it was because a dealer invited me to go to Russia with him to study or to visit art studios of artists that he was collecting to be able to sell, and I didn't really understand how important the Russians were in influence of artwork and how they stand out as being completely different and bold and really interesting. And going to Russia just completely changed my mindset, and I completely started collecting and falling in love with Russian work.
Yeah.
And I'm going over again in September. I'm taking a group for Fine Art Connoisseur to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and we're essentially going to the studios of the artists, visiting the academies. The academies there really kept the academic movement alive when everybody else had moved to modernism. That may be the only one good thing that Stalin did. And because of the academies that were formed by Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, and then maintained, the reason that you see so many good Russian painters is because they really get the best ones who get into the Sarakov or the Repin in St. Petersburg and Moscow. If you get into those, you're one of the best painters in the world by the time you get in there, and then they take you to the next level, and then if you graduate from there, there's a small group that if you get one of the 6 people into that, you're one of the finest painters ever born. So
the other thing about Russian painters that I've heard is that everyone else in Russia adores them. Being a painter in Russia is like being a rock star.
It's true.
And I actually painted with 4 Russians in Maine last fall. I think you were up doing some group event in Maine.
Yeah, my fall color.
That's right. So I was with Jesse Powell and Ben Fensky and Leo Mancini, and we had 4 Russians there, and that was an interesting week and a half.
I'll bet it was.
Those guys can really paint. Yeah.
You mentioned the rock star thing, so just briefly, Nikolai Dubovik, who is an instructor, professor at the Sarakov Institute in Moscow, he and I went to the symphony together, and we walked into the room, and when he walked in, people stood and applauded. The whole auditorium. And it's like a rock star being in there, and it was very odd. It was kind of strange because it's like, wait, this is an artist, and yet they hold them in such high esteem. I think that's wonderful. I wish our culture did that.
Yeah, well, I think if everyone knew how hard it was, they would.
Yeah, that's true. So, who are the inspirations from the past that really turn you on, that would perhaps be doing the masterpieces that you wish that you could do?
Well, for everyone I would list, there's probably 10 whose paintings I love. I don't remember their names, but the ones for sure I can remember would be like John Singer Sargent, George Bellows. I do like a lot of the Australian painters in history. Arthur Streeton comes to mind. And then Isaac Levitan, the Russian painter, of course. And there's 2 painters that kind of directly influenced the way I paint a little bit. And one is Rollo Peters. I believe he's a California painter, but he did nocturnes. and they're just the most beautiful nocturnes. And it kind of inspired me to explore that a little more. And then there was we have the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and they bought one of the first hopper paintings in town. I think it was not Nighthawks, it was Office at Night or something like that. But I thought it really made me think, and I stared at it, and it's got kind of this narrative to it, and all his work does. So I'm hoping that my work will eventually steer more towards somewhat of a narrative. I don't want to be too narrative or too defined in what the painting says, but I just want people to look at it and think something's going on. What is it? And have fun looking at it. And that's how those paintings seem to me.
Do you ever do any copying of masterworks?
Yeah, that was one of the classes that I took early on. We have a place in town called the St. Paul Art Academy, and they teach Renaissance painting, and there you learn by copying masters. So I was so in love with direct painting, I thought, well, I better start copying Sargent's because he painted fairly direct. So I've got a handful of Sargent copies that I've done. And yeah, it's useful. I don't really paint that way. I don't paint the same way as I paint when I copy something, but there's things to learn from that anyway.
Well, what I found fascinating was that when copying masters, you would quickly learn that one tiny little twist of a brush would make a face heavy or thin.
Oh, I know.
Something that seemed at the time seemed like it wouldn't make a difference. To see how these people master these things, amazing.
Yeah. Well, before you called me, I was working on a painting, and I added like a 1/16 of an inch thickness to a tire on a car, and all of a sudden the car looked real. But before that, it was bugging me. But you're right. It's just the smallest little things can make a big difference, and especially in portrait, like you just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, Carl, this has been a fascinating interview. You're one of my favorite painters now. I'm so glad that you decided to blow off medicine and come into painting, because I think you're inspiring us all. And I'm really excited about your work and what you've been doing, and I'm just anxious to see what's next.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you again to Carl Bretzke. Carl is quite an inspiration. Today's interview was sponsored by Russian Art Tour this September, where Peter Trippi and I will take a group from Fine Art Connoisseur magazine, the most amazing trip of our lifetime. It's 10 days of touring and art experiences. And if you don't know Russian art, you'll be stunned, as I was on my first trip. We're opening up our deep contacts to create something incredible, which quite frankly cannot be duplicated by anybody. If you're interested, you need to get your visa right away. So if you want to learn more, if there are seats remaining, there are only 8 seats left at this recording. Visit RussianArtTour.com. Today's podcast is sponsored by Fall Color Week. Coming up this October, a week of painting the stunning Maine coast, the harbors, the lobster boats, the amazing peak of fall color. See, it's my annual Fall Publishers Invitational, and I'm probably going to move it out of Maine in the future. So this might be the last time in Maine. It's a great way to soak up a week of painting, get a little time for yourself. You're all staying together in the same place. We feed you. We paint together every day. And of course, when you paint 2-3 paintings a day, you really ramp up your skills. And it's just a great time of fellowship and friendship. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Make lots of friends. You can learn more at fallcolorweek.com. Well, the plein air movement is red hot. That's probably why PleinAir Magazine remains the leader, the top-selling representational art magazine sold nationwide at Barnes & Noble in America. So I'm really proud of that, and you should be too, because that means people are interested in what you're doing. So drop by, pick one up if you don't have one, or get a bi-monthly subscription for half the price of the newsstand by going to PleinAirMagazine.com. Always fun to do these things. Carl was an inspiration. Let's do this again sometime, like next week. We will see you then. I'm Eric Rhoads, the publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big, bold world out there. You need to go out and paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.